everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Tech to Transform, the Mantis podcast. This month, I sat down with Government ICT analyst Rob Anderson to discuss the routes to recovery for the UK's community of GovTech suppliers in the wake of COVID. We also talked about the role of the new Central Digital and Data Office and how it will work alongside GDS, and the further changes we are likely to see to GovTech in 2021. Take a listen. So Rob, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for agreeing to chat. Just for our listeners then, could we start with you just telling us a little bit more about yourself and where you're from?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm delighted to be able to join the excellent podcast series today. So I've been involved in government IT for, too many years I care to remember, really. Starting back in the 80s when I was supporting for a supplier a customs and excise data centre down in Shoeburyness in Essex. Scarily, I think some of the applications on that are still being used today. Most of my working career has been spent with IT suppliers in and around government and private sector. But I've also spent 5 years in central government, including a short time as a Crown representative, so facing off to Microsoft, Oracle and SAP as the government representative for those companies. 7 years ago, I joined GlobalData, which was at the time Cable, to become principal analyst for central government. And it was a good fit for my experience and skills, really, having seen both the buyer and supplier side of IT contracting. It helped me, and I find it really stimulating to be able to offer insight to our clients, who are the tech providers, based on data-driven research, and that helps them build solutions that ultimately delivers better solutions and better citizen services from the government.
Fantastic. So absolutely crucial time at the moment for those services, of course, what with coming out of the pandemic, or hopefully coming out of it. It's looking good at the moment.
Well, yeah, it is. The vaccination seems to be going well, so hopefully we can stick to that roadmap that Mr. Johnson announced last week.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about GovTech today then, trends, and perhaps offer some advice to those suppliers that you say you work with, and of course Mantis works with. So if we could just start really with, we mentioned COVID already. GovTech, is very general, wide-reaching, lots of different departments and sectors. But I think kind of the two sectors that have really taken the front seat in the pandemic, quite rightly, of course, have been kind of healthcare, healthtech, and edtech, education sector, healthcare sectors. So what else is happening when it comes to GovTech? Is there lots going on behind the scenes that perhaps aren't quite grabbing the headlines as much as these two sectors at the moment?
Well, I'd like to think so. Obviously, as you say, health tech was bound to take a front seat with finding new ways of patient and clinician interaction, and similarly with a lot of students having to do remote learning. EdTech as well has been advancing. So GovTech has taken a bit of a backseat, I think, but it's not stopped completely. And there have also been some excellent examples of where it too has advanced. So, the one that's often quoted is HMRC with the coronavirus job retention scheme, which was brought into service from initial thinking through to a live service in about 6 weeks, which prior to that is unheard of in government and civil service terms. So, there are things going on. I think some of the business as usual transformation stuff has taken a bit of a backseat, but no, certainly the business of IT in government doesn't stop.
Yeah, and everyone has had to change their working practices, haven't they? And what we thought was short term, now it's ended up being quite long term. There's everyone has had to diversify and have different ways of working, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely, and I think everybody's convinced now that there will be a hybrid new normal, as they're talking about. So people working in the office and people working remotely, and so whilst some of the IT behind that has been short-term fixes, I think most of the government departments are now looking at ways of making that more secure and more robust longer term to enable a different way of working.
Yeah. If we think about the GovTech community of suppliers, those people that you work with, I know you wrote an article not so long ago about green shoots of recovery, which kind of suggests that it's kind of a difficult time for those suppliers. What's your experience been like with them in recent months?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely anecdotal evidence that some suppliers are getting really frustrated. And it's not just COVID, of course, there's been a distraction. There's the need to update or renew systems for a post-EU environment, replacing systems that previously we've relied on the EU for. So a lot of it, the business as usual transformation has been really put to the back burner. And the other thing is the civil service has always really had a reputation for being cautious and risk averse. So we've seen some evidence that departments have been falling back onto their tried and trusted suppliers at the expense of the newer, potentially more innovative providers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We've heard quite a bit about that, haven't we? Is that because there's an element of risk with a new supplier. You mentioned, I think the phrase you used there was tried and tested. So there's the reliability that they're going to deliver, even if perhaps that wasn't as an innovative idea as somebody else was maybe proposing them. So it's all about risk, calculating that element of risk, I suppose.
That's right. Although, I've also been in contact with smaller, newer suppliers that have already got a footprint in government that have benefited from the situation as well, because they've got systems in there that have had increased demand, things like case management and freedom of information requests, which have grown during the pandemic. And those companies, because they have delivered well, even though they're quite small and quite new, have benefited by retaining and growing in confidence because of that.
And what about GovTech spend last year in particular, in 2020? Did that increase? Did it change dramatically?
Looking at our own figures, and we collect our figures from a number of different areas, being the transparency publications and freedom of information requests. And for the last full year, so 2019-2020, we saw it pretty much stable. I think there's a 1% growth to just over 4 million in central government spend from 18-19 to 19-20. And looking at the figures to date for 2021, I think they're going to be more or less similar. I think there's been some changes in the way things are spent. So more use of cloud, more use of the remote technologies. And there was a slight dip in the mid-year of taking on resources because of the pandemic in terms of the remote working. So
yeah. So we work with lots of clients, as you know, that kind of go right across the public sector tech spheres. So lots of different sectors, from edtech to police, NHS, local government. But lots of them that we're speaking to, particularly new clients, are saying that they're finding it difficult kind of breaking into, and we talked about kind of the government opting for tried and tested contracts. That a lot of them are finding it difficult to kind of break through, despite there being kind of very dramatically changing situations where new technology will probably be required. Is that something that you've seen as well? Is it particularly for the SME suppliers? Is it difficult for them to break through?
Yeah, I think over the last 18 to 24 months, we have seen the pendulum swing back towards larger suppliers. I mean, I was involved in government when Francis Maud was at the Cabinet Office, and he talked about, broadening that supply chain to include lots more SMEs, and breaking down what he called the oligopoly of the large suppliers. And I think to some extent that worked at the time, and some of those large contracts were disaggregated, and less use was made also actually of the big consultancy firms. But I think over time that has swung back towards those people, partly because of the as you say, the caution, but also I think that there are other things to consider. I mean, the digital marketplace with the G-Cloud and Digital Outcomes and Specialist framework was particularly developed to enable SMEs to bid more easily for government business. And I think it worked very well in that first few years because SMEs were keen to join, were keen to add their voice to what was required, and they benefited a lot. Whereas the larger suppliers tended to be a little less agile and weren't quite on the ball in terms of making use of that route to market. I think that's changed. They now, I won't say game the frameworks, but they know how to play them so that they can use them to their advantage. And I think possibly because of all the other distractions that were going on, I don't think that those frameworks within the digital marketplace have evolved in the way that some SMEs would have liked them to. I mean, obviously they go through the various iterations, and the Crown Commercial Service, we're talking about, improving it to keep them up to date and to keep the pressure on the larger companies to enable SMEs to join in. But I don't think they've been able to keep up with the pace of change and change them in a way that continues to benefit SMEs. So, I mean, that's one area. The other thing about SMEs, and I say this to our clients who are SMEs as well, is, those frameworks are only really a shop window. It's really feet on the street and getting to know your customer and talking to them that will sell it. Just because you're on the framework, it doesn't mean people will come and buy your product. You have to go and assure them that it will do the job they want. And again, that's been particularly difficult over the last 12 months because of the lack of ability to have face-to-face conversations and to develop those relationships.
Yeah, that's really interesting. GDS is fantastic when it was created, but as you say, it's not just the only thing you need to do now to get your voice out there, is it? Especially, do you think because there are so many small businesses now on the framework as well, although it's a standard that they have to meet, it can also mean that there's still lots of noise that they have to cut through.
Oh, definitely, and I think because there are so many, it's difficult to cut through that noise. I mean, I've done work with Advice Cloud, who I'm sure you're aware of, who help those sorts of companies. And they're very good at pointing that out to people and saying, you can't just put a standard product description on there and expect people to buy it. And so they work with their associates to help customers refine what they put on there and make them stand out, so that when an opportunity does come up, they're in a better position to be able to respond.
We said just then about the pandemic has made it difficult for those smaller businesses to get out there, get in the mix and make themselves known. Have you seen any businesses doing that successfully during the pandemic, and what kind of techniques have they been using?
Yeah, a couple of, I can't think of particular names of clients, but I know a couple have used the opportunity because, senior IT people are working from home as well. And are on the Zoom and Google Meet and Teams, etc., that they find it easier because there's no gatekeeper in the office to stop them getting through, to actually just send a direct message to people. And if they target it right and have the right message, it sometimes works to be able to get access to those senior people that normally they wouldn't have, because there's a team of people in the office stopping them getting there.
I see. So I want to talk about now, I just need to check that I'm going to get this in the right order. So we're going to talk about the OECD's Digital Government Index. So back in October, I think it was, the UK government was ranked second on this index, which is pretty high ranking, and being fully digital government. So it's quite an achievement. It must give suppliers some confidence in the government's direction of travel going forward. We're very much kind of on that digital transformation route now, aren't we? And it must be very encouraging for suppliers.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that we are on that journey to digital transformation. It's just depends on what speed we're going at. I mean, I've looked at the OECD data, and yes, we're second, which is something to be lauded, because it shows that we are going in the right direction. However, if you look, a couple of things sprang out of the data from that. The that made me think, yeah, but we could be doing better. And one of them was around a central coordinating body. And the Cabinet Office likes to see itself as government HQ, to be able to be that coordinating body for digital transformation, but it suffers really from its history. Because of the way departments are funded, that they get the money and they can choose what they want. Government doesn't, Central Cabinet Office doesn't really have a strong mandate to be able to dictate what people do. They introduced the spend controls for IT spend so that they can sort of do a check and balance on what people are doing and steer them in the right direction to open standards and agile development, etc. But they can't force people to do it. And that's one of the things that let them down. I think we're only something like 11th of that list of countries on that survey, on that digital government index, based on that. And the other thing was around openness. One of the allied indices on the OECD is around open, reusable data. Our data, I think they call it, and I don't think the UK is even in the top 20 on that. So, and that brings me around to really another thing. Is one of the key things to digital transformation is around data, and to unlock the true power of a digital economy, we've got to make that data. Clearly, it's got to be robust, but it's got to be cohesive. It's got to be consistent across different departments, and to enable better services and a better digital world, it's got to be open to allow other third parties to be able to utilize that data and bring their own services to bear. And I think that's letting us down. But yeah, certainly, I mean, being number 2 on that index is something to be very proud of. On the flip side, if you look at the UN e-government survey, which they do every year, last year the UK was 7th, which again is, something, 7th in the world is pretty good. But you go back 4 years to 2016 and the UK was actually top of the UN e-government survey. So we've slipped 5 places in 4 years. And so you have to start questioning, well, why is that? And 2016, GDS had just brought in the whole gov.uk and introducing lots of digital services, and a lot of the big legacy contracts were being disaggregated. So it was an exciting time. Since that time, there's been various distractions, as I said, with Brexit, more recently COVID, but also the austerity agenda, which cut department spending and which forced them to look at really how easily they could get a return on investment. And some of the more advanced digital transformation projects were sort of put to one side, not scrapped, but put to one side because they weren't necessarily that easy to do. And I know we're recording this before the budget, but one of the things about the spending review last year was that there was only a 1-year allocation of funds rather than the typical spending review of a 3 to 4 year period. And a lot of these big transformation projects run over multiple years. So if you've only got 1 year's budget that's secured, it's very difficult to restart those projects without knowing whether you're going to get funding to continue them.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So do you think now then, after we spoke about at the start about possibly coming to the end of the pandemic, light at the end of the tunnel, is now a good time for GovTech to kind of stop and take stock and to see that they haven't been moving forward like other nations possibly have? And, we've had a series of unfortunate events, perhaps. That's kind of downplaying it massively, but that, I suppose that's a good way of saying it.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping so. I mean, you talked earlier about my article where I talked about the green shoots of recovery. I think we are seeing the potential for a lot better use. Certainly the government's talking up, the digital economy as being one of the things to boost Britain in a world where we're independent of Europe. And some of the things, other things we've seen, I did mention earlier that the Cabinet Office doesn't have a strong mandate, and I think part of that is also due to politicians. Francis Maude, when he was in charge, was a strong politician who could work with other people in departments, senior leaders in other departments, and help them understand why it was a good thing to do. I think over the last 2 years, 2, 3, 4 years, we've not seen any strong leadership from Cabinet Office on digital transformation. I mean, Julia Lopez, the current minister responsible for GDS and these things, has hardly done any speeches in the last year about digital transformation. So it's a bit concerning, but they're on the positive side. We have seen the announcements this year of the Central Digital and Data Office in the Cabinet Office, with Joanna Davinson moving in from the Home Office, where she seems to have done a good job, and it will now be leading the IT profession across government. So I'm keen to see what Joanna's plans are for the future, because one of the other things in the OECD report was that the UK is not strong on a firm strategy for the future in terms of digital, and successive strategies around data and transformation have been delayed and not as strong as they might be. So I'm hoping that they can be more robust in the future as a result of this.
Yeah. How does the Central Digital and Data Office, the CDDO, how will that work alongside GDS?
I think they will work more or less hand in glove. I mean, GDS did some fantastic things in making a consistent interface to government with gov.uk, with some of the low end government as a platform services like Notify and gov.uk Pay and things like that. I'll put Verify that in terms of ID assurance to one side for a minute. But the other thing that is now baked in to government development and government service development is around policy. Policy working with agile developers to develop things iteratively. And I go back to the HMRC, that the 6 weeks to bring the furloughing scheme up was a fantastic achievement. And I think GDS was great at getting that baked into the organisation, but over the last few years, due to changes in leadership as well, it's fallen back, and I think departments have taken on it upon themselves to move those skills along, whereas GDS has been sort of not floundering, but sort of sitting in the background thinking, well, what is our role? I think the CDDO now, with Joanna Davinson and Tom Reed moving in from MOJ to head up GDS, I think they can work hand in glove, such that GDS does a lot of the policy and advises governments and works on the still sort of advanced spending controls, whereas Joanna Davinson can bring in, as head of the IT profession, can sort of bring all the senior leaders together to work towards the same agenda in a similar way to the government procurement service has brought all the commercial people together to deliver in the same sort of way. And that's a cabinet and office initiative that seems to be working well, whereas they take ownership of all those commercial people and then loan them back to the department so that they all have a similar level of understanding and working.
As you said earlier, that sounds like a really strong, effective leadership structure, doesn't it? Somebody kind of driving that forward, with all all these different areas of expertise and specialisms is all fantastic, but you need that one kind of central force to drive the change forward.
Absolutely, and I think, to be honest, I still think we're lacking the political clout behind it. Whether Alex Chisholm as COO of government has that, I'm not sure. I think we need some ministerial backing for it as well. But at the moment, all the ministers are involved in a number of different things. They've got varying priorities. Digital doesn't seem to be high enough up the agenda for my liking because it warrants more, because it can deliver so much more in terms of better services.
Absolutely, and we've seen so many times, haven't we, when digital is an afterthought, it's nowhere near as effective. It has to come from the top, really. It has to lead change, doesn't it? And then it's much easier to work other things around digital rather than the other way around, I suppose, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the policy people, the policy makers have to work very, very closely, cohesively with the IT people, the digital people, so that they go on parallel tracks. Because if they're working separately, then at any point they can diverge, and what's delivered in the end doesn't deliver what is needed by the end users.
Yeah. And you touched on a moment ago about suppliers working together. So that's a really good point. I think you were talking about things running in parallel. When you have much more integrated, interoperable technology, those are words that we've been hearing for years, and we're seeing very, very slow change. But I think suppliers are much more, certainly from my experience as well with our clients, suppliers are very willing to work with each other. It's just having the go-ahead to do so, or that capability, or even having the departments that they're working with kind of willing to do that, I suppose. So that, again, comes back to procurement, doesn't it? So can we talk about the government's green paper, Transforming Public Procurement? Could I get your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I think, updating procurement rules and having some consistent rules around it, I think, are absolutely necessary. My concern, a lot of my concern around this is the rhetoric that's going around it. Some of the messaging seems to be, we need to transform procurement rules because we're out of the clutches of the EU now, and we don't want to have to stick with those bureaucratic rules that were introduced, which stifle competition. I mean, in actual fact, a lot of those EU procurement rules were lobbied for by our own people. When I was in the Cabinet Office, I worked with Sally Collier, and she was forever in discussions with the EU procurement people about getting some of the things rolled out, so it does encourage SMEs and the like. So simpler, rules that are compliant will definitely be beneficial to a broader range of suppliers, and particularly the SME community. And that's vital to stimulate a vibrant digital economy. So I am very keen well, actually, given it is an open consultation, I'm very keen for as many suppliers as possible to respond to that green paper and put in their views. Because two areas that I think do serious consideration with it. One, which I think, again, will benefit the SME community, is around the social value. I mean, there's procurement regulation now that says 10% of the evaluation of bids have some form of social value in there. But to build that strong digital economy within the UK, I think that the social value part plays an increasingly important part. And I think SMEs, because of their links with other organisations and with local bodies, they can bring that to bear. And the other area within it is the transparency, which obviously highlighted recently by the COVID contract controversy, as shall I say it, in the High Court, where Matt Hancock lost the case for not publishing the contracts on PPE and the like. I think it's obviously vital for a company like ourselves, GlobalData, in we assist our clients in providing them with full contract data, and if the departments and central government isn't being open and transparent with it, then it's very difficult for us. So obviously I have a vested interest in it, but also that carries on. If our clients can't use data because we haven't got a full set, then it's not helping them in growing their business and helping government. So the transparency issue, I think, is very key as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, I suppose just one more question from me. What kind of other changes that we haven't touched on, or what are the most kind of important changes do you think would you like to see this year? I mean, we're already into March, but it's still sort of the beginning of the year, and then into next. COVID behind us. What changes would you like to see in GovTech?
Well, certainly I'd like to see, as I've said a couple of times, stronger leadership from the centre, even if it's not a strong mandate to make things happen. It's one that, it strongly encourages and works collegiately to make things happen better. Another thing that I always bang on about, I have to say, is the funding model. Whilst departments continue to be funded separately, they'll continue to work in the manner that befits them best. So to encourage departments to work more closely, particularly in the areas of data and digital, I think I'd love to see Treasury working with Cabinet Office to find some way of funding that in a different manner. I've not written any strong research papers on it, but I think if there was that pool of money that strongly encouraged departments to work together, then I think that would benefit citizens as a whole and government as a whole. The whole key to a better, bigger digital environment is unlocking the value of the data that's held. And at the moment, each department has its own lake of data, which is stored in many different ways, even within their own organisation, never mind across government. And there's nobody's forcing them is perhaps the strong word, but nobody's actively encouraged them to share it across other than for individual departments. I mean, we have seen since the Digital Economy Act came into being, government departments are now allowed to share data across boundaries. But we're only seeing it in certain use cases. So Home Office and DVLA have been linking up with things, simple things like using the same photo for your driving license and passport. And DWP and HMRC have been doing some stuff on fraud and error. But I think until we see, and I'm encouraged that there is now a data strategy. And I think one of the things that the CDDO in the Cabinet Office will hopefully do is strengthen that data strategy and bring together a pool, a committee, if you like, of senior leaders, such that they look at ideas of how they can best utilise that data and bring it together for the benefit of everyone. So data's quite key. I touched on fraud and error there, and that's one thing that has frustrated me ever since I worked in government in the early 2010s. Is that the amount lost to fraud and error in public sector is enormous. I mean, the figures vary because it's very difficult to track, but it's certainly in tens of billions. And if we could utilise data and digital technologies and data analytics to reduce that in itself will fund better digital transformation. So I'd like to see more advances in that area. And again, working on how we can help the SME community. I think, our clients are both big and small, so I'm not dismissing that the large SI type suppliers, they have a part to play. And in actual fact, I think one of the areas that they could help, if they're allowed to, is in the systems integration piece, not the whole single outsourcing contract, but in bringing together a supply chain of broad range of suppliers, because government would like to take that back in-house, but they don't have the skills to. When they outsourced all the contracts back in the 80s and 90s, then all those skills are gone. And it's not easy to do on a piecemeal basis. You've got to have somebody looking at an overarching strategy. And the people that know how to do that best are all those big suppliers. But they need to be encouraged to do that in a way that they do utilise a supply chain of the best in breed suppliers amongst the smaller supplying organisations.
Thank you, Rob. Plenty of food for thought. A very interesting time, I think, isn't it? We're on the horizon of change, I suppose, and
Yeah, I mean, I seriously think it could be a very exciting year. Hopefully, if the roadmap for getting out of the coronavirus pandemic comes to fruition and we're all able to live an almost normal life by June, then I think that there's a big opportunity for government to take giant leaps forward. So very hopeful that with the introduction of the CDDO, that we can develop a strategy that benefits us all.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, fantastic to talk to you. Thank you very much for explaining all of that to me.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's really been really worthwhile, and I hope your listeners enjoy it. And by all means, I'm happy to take up conversation with individuals as and when they've seen it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob.